Dzień dobry, assalamu alaikum, ciao, konnichiwa, bonjour, hola, good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Ken at 10. How are you today? I hope you're well. Back in the office today, as you can see, and talking about all things property as usual. As far as the weather's concerned here in Norbury, it's nice actually, nice spring day. It's fresh, bright, the blue skies are up. As far as the market's concerned, are storm clouds rising? That's the question on everybody's lips, isn't it? Is what is going on out there? We've got interest rates going up, all sorts of things. The economy's looking shaky and everybody's a little bit worried. What does that mean for the market? Well, very, very difficult to say. But one thing we know for sure, inflation is running rampant and out of control. And that is one of the reasons why interest rates are being pushed up by the Bank of England, because they're trying to counter that inflation by making people less likely to spend money and get into this vicious cycle of spending more money and therefore things go up in price and therefore spending more money and therefore asking for a rise. And the whole thing goes around in what we call an inflation spiral. And you end up like Germany were back in the day when you're going around with wheelbarrows full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. And they're trying to control that inflation. The only weapon they really have to control inflation is interest rates. And that's why they're pushing them up. Having said that, just to get it into perspective, interest rates are still historically an extremely low rate, bearing in mind historical averages. Having said that, I don't believe that we'll ever be looking at those old historical averages again of very high rates, because already, even with that 0.25% rise, it's a massive burden for people here in the UK and is affecting the economy and does affect everything else. A lot of people are arguing that perhaps the increase should have come sooner to try and check inflation at a much earlier point in the cycle. But what does it mean to you? Well, for all of us that are not on fixed rate mortgages, it means you're paying more every month on your mortgage, of course. And this is a real pressure. One of the interesting things to note, and a little chink of light at the end of the tunnel, though, is that the swap rates for medium-term mortgages are actually lower than the shorter-term rates. So if you look at a 2-year fix, then the price of those 2-year fixes is actually higher than the 10-year fixes often. And this is interesting because it shows that the view is that long-term interest rates should be falling off, coming down a bit. And I have a feeling that this could well tip us into a bit of a recession. And if it does, then you'll see interest rates stay where they are or perhaps even come down again. Who knows? Nobody can say for sure. But what we do know is inflation is running rampant. The government are trying to control it, and they're trying to control it by putting up the base rate, which therefore means that the mortgages that you and I pay are more expensive because the lenders that lend to us borrow that money from the Bank of England at those rates and then add on their little bit of profit on top of that. Well, I say a little bit of profit, let's be honest, massive profit, isn't it? So what does that mean for the market? Well, the problem is a shortage of supply. One of the things that's really interesting is that repossessions are expected to go up by 40 to 50% in the second half of this year. That is huge. Having said that, it's from a very, very low number indeed. So it's unlikely, well, it definitely won't change the market to any market degree in terms of prices, because you'll always have the odd repossessions come along. But bear in mind, anyone with a repossession is charged professionally with getting the best possible price. There's this myth that they'd definitely be cheaper because they're a repossession. It's just not true. You know, there's still going to be competition for them, and especially in a market like today where there's such an undersupply of properties available. And that undersupply will really push through in the second half of this year, in my view. We'll see less and less properties coming to market, and with less and less properties coming to market, and still bearing in mind we've got a ratio of something like 10 to 1 at the moment, i.e. 10 buyers for every property that's available for sale, then we can expect, even if that number were to fall by half, there's still more buyers than sellers, underlining the market. On top of that, of course, we've got buy-to-let investors, and we've seen an absolute bounce in rents here in London, especially in the prime sector. They've gone through the roof, but even in the general sector, rents are crazy. Here in SW16, we're now looking at an average of £1,000 per calendar month for a 1-bedroom property in Zone 3 commuter range of London. That's massive for a young professional person. And what are we seeing because of that? Well, we're seeing more people combining their incomes in order to get the affordability of that, because of course the other option is to rent a room, and that often comes with a shared bathroom. And let's be honest, nobody wants that unless they have to get it, do they? Especially when the number of people sharing depends on the size of the property you have. So interest rates, what we expect to see is they're not going to go much higher this year, in my view. This is not financial advice, by the way. It's just an opinion. I think we may see another quarter point rise, but I think more likely we'll see a fall off in activity, and we may well find that this is the end of the rate rises for the year, because I do think that the economy is struggling already. On top of that, this 0.25% rise might well put the tin hat on it generally. Having said that, inflation is going to run high for a while yet, so who knows? They could go for another rate rise or two. What do we tend to do when rates go up? Well, we tend to think, well, perhaps we'll wait and see. Perhaps we'll hold off. And when we hold off, that further exacerbates the undersupply of property, meaning that those looking for houses are still struggling to find. So really interesting. And it really is a market of two halves. Those at the very bottom end of the sector struggling to pay their mortgages, which is very sad. Those in the middle trying to find a home, and they can't find one because there's not enough supply. It really is a strange market. On top of that, gardens are in massive supply, massive demand here in London. And you know, the average price for a London garden now per square metre is £2,348 per square metre. That's crazy money, isn't it? Just for 1 square metre of garden, £2,348 is the average that people pay in London. It's extraordinary, isn't it? So apart from that, busy day today on valuations, which is good to see. A few buy-to-lets coming up as well. A few people, circumstances are changing where they're coming to market with their homes to rent out, perhaps going for a job overseas and the likes. And that's good to see, because we really need the stock, because that's one thing that there is really a lack of as well. So lack of supply on sales, lack of supply on lettings. And how does this all come to good, if you will? How does it all change for good? Well, I don't think there is any way, really. The truth is that, you know, when you've got property at such short supply on the one hand, and you've got a lack of building on the other, and now we've got a supply crisis with actually materials coming in for building, let alone their price, but actually getting the correct materials in for builders to construct houses. This is causing a slowdown in the production chain up to the building of houses. On top of that, they're slowing down anyway. And of course, then we've now got the Queen's speech coming up, and she's going to talk about the abolition of Section 21. Section 21 is the no-fault eviction route for landlords that wish to evict a tenant for no other reason than they want their home back. And there is an abolition of Section 21 coming, and that is going to be in the Queen's speech. But of course, that's just a very beginning of the process. We then have to go through the whole white paper, and the government then have to put this into legislation, having consulted everybody about it. And it'd be interesting to see where that goes. But there's no doubt there will have to be some fairly good incentives for landlords to keep buying properties if they can no longer get them back easily. So therefore, in my view, with Section 21 gone, they're going to have to bolster other routes of getting the property back and making Section 8, for instance, where you're taking the property back because there are rent arrears, a much easier notice to follow through, so that landlords can be protected. Because if landlords can't be protected, you can bet one thing: they'll bolt. They will go the other way, and that will even further exacerbate the housing crisis the government say they're trying to solve. So don't vilify landlords so much that you end up with unexpected implications. And I think that's quite likely, actually, is that we end up with landlords thinking, well, clearly the government doesn't want us anymore, and therefore we'll exit the sector while prices are strong and bold. And that's what we're finding at the moment, actually, is a lot of landlords are taking the opportunity to reduce the number of properties that they have, or they're taking the opportunity to actually sell up and go into other markets. So interesting times ahead. Nobody can say for sure what's going to happen next, but my view is what we're going to see is certainly a slowdown second half of this year. Prices are not going to fall off a cliff. If you're waiting for prices to fall off a cliff, I think you'd be waiting a very long time, and you might be disappointed that you didn't make that decision earlier. That remains to be seen. What I expect to happen is there'll be a consolidation. We'll see price rises start to come down, and we'll see prices start to actually stay still for a while, rather than the meteoric rises that we've seen. We'll see those prices just staying where they are, because it's got to a stage where affordability is coming into question. And of course, when the first-time buyer can no longer afford the flat at the very bottom of the chain, then that flat seller can't afford the next property up the chain, and so on and so forth. And of course, lenders are looking at all these inflationary pressures and the added costs on mortgages when they're calculating affordability for borrowers. So borrowers, without question, will be able to afford less, and lenders will factor that into how much they'll loan to people, and that will also have an impact on the market going forward. So really interesting and quite unprecedented times ahead, together with everything that's going on in Ukraine. The economy is in a mess, And the government's in a mess too, aren't they? I mean, gosh, even the opposition's in a mess. Everything out there seems crazy right now. So really hard to predict what will happen next, but really looking very interesting. As far as house price growth is concerned, it's at a 15-year high right now. Can that continue? I suspect not. I think we're going to have a very, very strong time this half of the year. Second half, I think you'll start to see it tail off and there'll be a bit of a consolidation about the market. But the lack of supply will keep prices underpinned. We'll see. Apart from that, hope you have a fantastic day. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition. Until then, look after yourselves and if you can, your family and friends. Ciao.